Hello, and welcome to another episode of Talk with Koiya. I am your host, Koiya, and as you know, this podcast is brought to you by Talk, Test, Treat. And much like this podcast, they encourage you to do exactly that. Talk about HIV, get tested for it, and if you do get a diagnosis, get treated. If you are in the Central Florida area and looking for a testing center near you, go to talktestcfl.com. Today, I have another it girl in the building. She is joining me, no other than Shirley Dorr.
Hey, what's up, you guys?
Hey, girl.
Hey, girl.
So, for the people who don't know who you are, go ahead and give us a little rundown about you, what you do, all of it.
Hey, what's up, you guys? It's your girl, Shirley Dorr, a multi-hyphenate creator, but most people know me as a media personality online, giving you the go-to around in and around Orlando and beyond. When I'm not doing that, I'm educating folks on sexual wellness, whether that's on Twitter, Instagram, or just casual conversations in and about, like different spaces where Black girls come together and have fun. Other than that, I have a plethora of things about me. Being an entrepreneur that helps Haitian creatives amplify their voice while also running a marketing agency. And that's pretty much everything.
You have a very popular blog that I don't know. It was faceless for a very long time.
Yes, it was.
And now do you tell people about?
I still don't.
Okay.
Only in my email.
Okay. But your blog site is called?
It's called Haitian to Blog. It's actually an online platform where we provide career and career development and professional development resources to Haitian creatives who are immigrating to the United States to, escape whatever issues they may be facing in the Caribbean island itself or throughout South America. And on top of that, we also help people here by giving quarterly grant opportunities to kind of like fund their creative endeavors. It was a passion project. I actually created it for me. And as I was navigating my journey as a content writer, I was just like feeling extremely lonely and was like, who are my creators? Where they at? How can I find them? And it ended up turning way bigger than me to where so many other people were like, thank you for creating this. We need this space. We are so happy to meet designers, graphic designers. And it merged into a tech platform where we created a directory so that people can find creators of Haitian descent, whether they needed them for translation services or to design a website with Haitians and Haiti in mind. And yeah, so it's been faceless for a very long time. I ended up, revealing things about myself when I did my first pitch competition and won. And then I only let my newsletter subscribers know who I am. The page, still kind of anonymous on there. I like the anonymous feel.
And it works for you.
Yeah,
It really works. Like you said, you're multi-hyphenate. You do a million things. But I always thought that it was cool because I knew about the blog site for a very long time, but I didn't even know that I knew the person who was running it until like last year. I was like, wait, this is hers? So yeah, I love it. I admire everything you do. I think it's so cool. But we start every episode with playing the Talk with Koiya card game. So I am going to ask you to pull a card and let's get into some questions.
Okay, let me pull something. Okay. Top 3 songs on your sex playlist.
Ooh, this is the perfect question for you.
It really is. Like, I feel like this was destined. Oh my gosh. So my top 3 songs has to be No Guidance.
Ooh, I love it.
There's No Guidance, Usher Trading Places. And there's like a battle between these 2 songs that I really, really love. So I'm going to just stick with Snooze by SZA, not because of the lyrics, but because of the sound.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. That was a solid good 3. I think that was the best 3 we've ever gotten.
Yeah.
Sure. All right, pull one more.
Okay. Have you witnessed HIV stigma? And if so, tell us about it. Being in the sexual wellness space, this actually happens often. Actually, one of my superpowers is being Haitian and being a sexual health educator. And one of the things that often comes up is our South Florida folks. South Florida, Caribbean folk, they are afraid of that word. They run away from it. The moment you talk about it, they want to act like it doesn't exist. Or they'll be like, "Salt palela, what are you talking about?" And one of the stigmas is Black men, Caribbean men specifically, who are like, there's no way I can get it if she's good. So if the woman takes care of her sexual health, then the man is taken care of. It's fine. We're good. As long as you decide to do the work, I don't have any problems. And that's one of the biggest like stigmas. I once had somebody come up to me in my DMs. It was actually, like very stereotypical Broward guy, dreads, sticking up, like, the culture of Broward. And he's like, so you mean to tell me if I have sex with a woman, and he said dom, which means woman in Broward. But he said, if you tell me I have sex with a dom, does that mean I'm going to get HIV? And I was just like, yeah, we had a very depth conversation. I told him the symptoms, what does it look like? And he kind of like projected onto me and assumed that I had HIV because I talked about it so much.
Wow.
And I was like, wow. And I said, no, I don't actually. And he said, oh. I said, mm-hmm. He's like, well, I just assumed, since you talk about it, I probably talked about it like twice a month. Since you talk about it on your social media and it's one of your topics, I thought it was because you had it. And I said, no, you don't have to have it to, advocate for it.
So interesting.
Yeah.
But I love that you say that, because today's tone of the conversation, what I really am looking for is just to help people have transparent conversations surrounding things like this, right? Because there's so much stigma and ignorance in this world, as you're saying. So I can understand why people have a hard time having transparent conversations surrounding this thing that they're ignorant about and seems much bigger than them.
Right.
So I'm excited to do that. But I don't know if you know this. Did you know more than 1 million STIs are acquired every day worldwide?
Wow. Daily.
1 million.
Daily.
Why do you think that we still aren't having conversations surrounding our sexual health with our friends, with our partners, with our family members?
So I faced this so many times as a creator and also someone who's just like casual in conversation with friends. I think one of the things that come up is guilt, or not even guilt, but like shame. So like the shame that comes with saying that maybe sometimes you don't take care of your sexual health. Maybe sometimes you don't ask that question. Maybe sometimes you're so caught up in the moment that question doesn't even come up for you. And so I think that a lot of people feel shame to ask, but then also shame to even have the conversation with other people, to admit, like, sometimes I don't really prioritize that and I just want to have sex.
Yeah. No, you're right. But then, in my opinion, more shame is going to come if you actually were to contract one of these STIs or, God forbid, HIV.
Yeah.
For the people who are subscribing to that mentality, I think some of these stats will shock them and make them understand the state of the STIs in the United States. And this is per CDC surveillance data from 2021, but 1.6 million cases of chlamydia that year alone, which, by the way, was a decrease from 2017 by 4.7%. So for that to be a decrease, that number is still very high.
Yeah.
And then let's talk about gonorrhea. We're talking about 696,000 cases, which was an increase by 25% from 2017. Syphilis is one of those ones I feel like we don't hear as much about anymore, but I think it's definitely become a rise in it as of recent. 171,000 cases. That's a 68% increase from 2017. Like, these things are out here, y'all, alive and well, and the stats are here to prove it.
Right.
We forget also about pregnant women and having babies, right? You can pass this down to your
children.
like, this child didn't ask for this coming into the world. Cases of syphilis among newborns. 2021, we're talking about 2,600 cases, which was an increase by 185% from 2017. Like, these numbers are here. These things are alive and well, and they're rampant, and people are choosing not to have these conversations.
Yeah. It's uncomfortable. I once had, and I think we've interacted with it, but I once had made a post where I was like, I find it very interesting that Twitter is a space for sexual anything. And none of the people who prioritize conversations on sex prioritize conversations on healthy sex or healthy ways to care for your sexual health. It's never a conversation. It's always distant. And it's in the background. It's like, yeah, we know that these things exist, but we'd rather the kiki rather than the tough, uncomfortable conversation.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think even though it's realistic that 1 million people plus, it's like we have like 6 million, 7 million people in the US. So 1 million of us are experiencing sexual health STIs,
Right.
and we still don't get the picture. It's
No
not there.
conversation surrounding it at
Mm.
all. And it's to the point now where it's like, I understand in the 90s and back in the day why it was a taboo thing to speak about, right? But now, with so much information, and I'm talking about information that's at your fingertips too. It takes nothing to type these things into
Right.
Google and you instantly have this information. Back in the day, we had to wait for it to come down from the health department, be passed along to us.
Right.
We regurgitate it and give it to someone
Right.
else. Now you can open up your
Snap of your
phone.
fingers. As you were mentioning the data about chlamydia, literally this morning I got a notification that the rise of chlamydia has doubled in this year alone because of the attack on some of our favorite spaces to go get STI testing. And I was like, wow, that, we were hoping that there would be a change because of the increase in, health education just in general. And because there's a lack of resources, like the funding and all of these things are happening, now people are having less and less access to the ability to get testing for that, all because of different changes that are happening in policies.
And I know as women, sometimes we don't understand the severity of what could take place if we were to go a long time with an STI untreated.
Correct.
Like, I just recently had an event last week, and one of the girls spoke at the event and said that, she had a fiance and they were together for a while, and he ended up giving her an STI. And the long-term effect of that now is she can't have kids. So we're not having these conversations, and we're doing things that may possibly prevent us from doing things that we've always wanted. Her dream was to have kids. Her dream was to be a mom. But this thing is being taken away from her just because she didn't have that conversation. That's crazy to me.
And I sometimes wonder, is it worth us just having the 2-3 minutes of pleasure to
Literally 2-3 minutes, right?
They're like 2 to 3 minutes of pleasure just because we didn't want to have a 30-second conversation about getting tested.
And I do want women to know and understand, like, STIs and fertility, they go hand in hand, and I don't think a lot of people are educated about that. And this is a space where I want to do that. Female fertility, including tubal factor infertility, is a major public health concern, especially worldwide now, right? Most cases of tubal factor infertility are attributed to untreated STIs, like we're talking about, that ascend along the reproductive tract and can cause tubular inflammation, damage, and scarring. And examples of STIs that do this: gonorrhea, chlamydia, Shrek. These are things that are what's considered your everyday common STIs. Like, everyone's just getting them, and it's a thing. You pop this pill and it's whatever. But do we know the long-term effect of these things?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's, my friend Wheezy often says this, it's too easy. Like, when you get chlamydia, you go pop a pill and it's like, okay, cool. Like, she's like, they should make it harder. Because in my mind, it's like, oh, I had got chlamydia that one time. I popped the pill and it was cool. So if I get it again, it's just going to, but not understanding the long-term effects of if you keep getting this thing, what could possibly happen.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that really come up is advocacy. For a long time, I've always had people doing the pointing the finger thing. And I'm like, okay, what if we just all decided to stop pointing fingers and we just took regency and ownership over our sexual health and decided to just get tested? No pointing fingers, no accountability, not the Spider-Man meme. And we just did what we needed to do to protect ourselves.
Agreed.
How would things pivot? How would things change if we just said, let me go get tested every 3 months. It's free and accessible. And go from there.
And speaking of, I love that you said that. Now, you being a sex educator, I can imagine you've had extensive amount of research in this area. So I want to talk about, because it seems that a lot of people are ignorant to a lot of this, right? What are some transparent ways that we could have or make this conversation a lot easier when it comes to STI testing and prevention measures?
So I honestly want to take it to like the entertainment route,
Okay.
because that's where people feel more at peace is when they find something entertaining. So even though there's been an increase in like censorship because we're targeting younger audiences, when we think about the conversations that are happening around sex, if there were just someone else who tapped in and who said, while we're having this conversation, let's talk about prevention.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go ahead and say these are the things that you need to do in order to have even more enjoyable sex, because nothing's more enjoyable than peace of mind, right? So if we can give people that peace of mind in these spaces where they get most of their information, it would completely change the game. So there's like a platform, it's called B Condoms. And I love that they merge sexual health conversations with, of course, selling condoms, right? And they do a really good job of just like cultural competency and like tapping into whatever is trending and tapping into what's ever happening now, to also be like, hey, don't forget to wear a condom. Oh, also don't forget to get tested. And I love that they do it in a comical way. They have black artists come and draw different like illustrations. And for some reason, it gets people's attention. Now, what's the efficacy? Don't know, not sure yet. But I just wonder what that would look like if we did that constantly. Like the Shade Room, you know what they promote, but they can also promote getting tested.
You're right.
They can also say something. They are not far removed from that conversation. And I wonder what it would look like if we just infuse the kikis, the entertainment, the celebrity gossip with just a little bit of health information.
Yes.
And get it out to them so that they can reach the masses as well. Even if it's like 1,000 people looking, who cares? Because those 1,000 people are going to be impacted. And the more that number grows, the easier, the better things get for us as well.
I can imagine being a sex educator, dating for you. um, How easy is it to just like have those transparent conversations? Because I feel like there is a layer of added pressure with a guy knowing like who you are,
It's
what
not.
you do. Oh, tell us all about it.
It's not. I can actually share a dating experience that I had that had to be terminated because it was like, boy, what are you doing?
Oh wow.
So I have testing kits at home, right? I've been fortunate to connect with a lot of other communities that provide things like syphilis and STI testing options where they send me kits to try out. And so I have my own at home. And there was someone that I reconnected with, and I was like, when was the last time you got tested? And boy, they gave me the runaround, which I say is quite insane because you know exactly who I am. You know exactly what I do. You've had these conversations with me. You've seen me do videos, podcast episodes. You've seen all of this. Yet, despite knowing that, you don't make this a priority. So I went ahead and took it upon myself. And I'm a very PowerPoint heavy kind of girl.
Okay.
And I went ahead and gave him all the testing centers near him because he doesn't live in Orlando, completely different city. Sent him all of the testing centers near him. What time's it open? Oh, I work. I said, okay, you could go right before work. Oh, I get off at 3. They close at 6. Here you go. And I said, go ahead and get tested. Whenever you get tested, we can consider a sexual relationship. And that man never got tested. Never got tested. Came to my place. Never got tested.
Wow.
Despite me doing the STI test in front of him, refused to do the STI test. Why? I don't know, but I probably dodged a good bullet. When was he going to do it? I couldn't tell you what the reasoning for him was, but that is how in depth it is for me as an educator who has to like constantly be like, hey, we need to do these things. And another thing that I want people to know is we slip up because we also like pleasure, right? And I'll never forget a slip up I had within like the last 2 years. And I remember literally the next day I was like, hey, and people thought I was insane for doing this. And I was like, I'd love to go on a date with you to a testing center.
Wow.
And the guy was like, huh? I was like, I'd love to go on a date with you to a testing center. We can get burgers after if you're hungry. And he was like, I work. And I was like, we can actually work there because you work from home, right?
I know that's right.
And he was like, yeah, you know what? Let's go. I was like, well, shout out to him for saying yes. And we met up at the center. It was a very busy day. So we ended up staying there for like 4 hours, but we chatted. We talked about work in between. We were on our computers, put our computer down, went into our respective rooms, got our testing. After we went to get burgers, literally, then we went to the movies, and then we went to his place.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
it was a great arrangement. And that's the opposite of someone who doesn't really care too much about their sexual health and who wants to make you feel safe in order for you to proceed and continue.
Which I don't understand because as a man, it's like, in my perspective, I would get excited like, oh, she take her sexual health serious. Like, I got one, you know?
Yeah.
But if it were the opposite, I would think the opposite too. Like, I don't know if I really want to talk to her because,
Right.
and why don't they think like that?
So I've encountered that even in like couples sessions and like couples therapy where a lot of my clients come for infidelity, and even in that conversation, in the infidelity conversation with people who have been in long-term relationships for 20 years plus, there's just the it can't be me and it won't happen to me. It's just that, like, it just can't be me and it won't happen to me. There has to be some form of dissociation, possibly, or maybe even some distance from the idea that it is possible. But the it is possible is never, it's never a point of consideration. It's not possible. Like the 100% leans into the it's not possible. It can't be me. So I think what we're doing is important, like saying these are the amount of people that are. And I can only imagine how many of them said that it couldn't be me. This couldn't happen to me. These things wouldn't happen to me. Well, I have to break it to you. These things happen just as much as anything else happens in this world. You are susceptible to it. The more you care for yourself, the more you prioritize this, the less likely you're going to see these things happen to you.
Through the work that you have done, may it be stigma, may it be ignorance, may it be whatever, let us know the importance of STI prevention conversations.
Ooh, yeah. So almost like the relationships conversations, like y'all love your little 50-50 debate.
Oh, girl, that is
let's,
one.
Let's 50-50 that prevention conversation.
Yeah, no facts. That's a good one.
Yeah, because the more people have these conversations on what side of whatever they lean towards, the more we're shifting people's minds to make decisions, whether it's groupthink or individuality. We're shifting people's perspectives to meet somewhere. And I think when people didn't have so much access to other people's thoughts, they just leaned into their own. But if we kept hearing from people who may have contracted STIs, who may have dodged a bullet, who may have been as forward as I was, the more we hear it, the more we're being seen, we're feeling heard. We're like, oh, you can do this. Like, you can literally say to someone after you may have sex with them, hey, let's get tested. And they may say yes. And you may also say it to someone and they may say no. And you can just decide to no longer have any communication with that person. And knowing that that option exists, that there are people who are doing it, there are people who are having that conversation, it just opens up the door for people to make decisions similarly. So I think with humans, we keep being avoidant. And when we have conversations about prevention, we're lessening that.
Talk to me. Again, we know that you are an educator, and couples therapy kind of is what you dabbled in before or were doing. Yeah. Was there ever a time where a partner may have contracted an STI or HIV or some form of that and had a problem with going and letting their other sexual partners know? Or for the person who has recently contracted an STI and now has to go and let all of their sexual partners know.
Mm-hmm.
Give us some ways that can possibly be a lot easier, because that is a big thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's one thing for you to have to digest this and understand it and take it in, and now I gotta call everybody I done slept with and let them know I have this thing.
So this has actually happened to a friend of mine, because I still have to, stick to confidentiality for another 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
But there is someone that I've been familiar with who was contacted and told that they had contracted an STI, and it was chlamydia. And what happened may have been the most uncomfortable conversation that they've ever had to go through because they were extremely sexually active.
Oh,
So that meant tens and twelves plus people had to be notified.
wow.
And I remember just sitting there with that person, and the person confided in me, obviously, because this is what I did for a living. And they were like, what do I do? How do I do it? And I said, well, you have to tell everyone. And because someone contracted STI and you were intimate with them, you do have to notify everybody. One, legally. Two, because you have a conscience and you're talking about it right now, and that your conscience is telling you that it's important for you to tell everyone. And there was no easy way of them picking up their phone and calling them.
Yeah.
Literally picked up their phone, called them. A couple people got text messages. Text message is the most uncomfortable way. It's also, for some people, they would prefer text message. Others would be like, this is a conversation that you need to have with me on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So just make sure you cross all your I's. You cross all your T's and you dot all your I's. Give both. Do both options. And if there's someone who needs reassurance in person, hopefully you guys still have a relationship that's intact to where you can have that conversation in person. But nothing's worse than getting something and being scared and learning that you've contracted it from someone who was very sexually active.
Yeah.
So they had to make the phone call. They had to send a text message. There was a couple upset people. There was also the fact that the person who had to notify the people that they had STI had to notify their partners
Oh, yeah.
as well. So it's a trickle effect. Like if you notify one person, that person has to notify the other person, and you hope that the conversation continues down the line. I had someone that I knew they were intimate with who said that they didn't notify their partners because I don't have anything. I was like, oh, I mean, I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to tell you that you're doing anything wrong, but I would urge you to pick up that phone and call them so that they at least have the autonomy to make a decision about what to do if they were to have gotten an STI.
I love that.
Yeah.
You just talked to us about a slip up that you had 2 years
Mm-hmm.
ago. Prior to doing the work, or even now with doing the work, was there ever a time that you felt you weren't in control of your sexual health?
Um.
Maybe when you were younger,
Oh,
before
you know
you
what?
kind of.
Yes. So before being sexually educated, one of the stories that always comes up is like, how did you decide to be a sex therapist? And really, it was getting my butt whooped for stumbling upon porn. That's exactly what
Oh,
got me into it. I was like 11 years old. My
okay.
cousins were looking up the word pornography, and I was so curious. Like, what are you guys doing? What's happening? And maybe like 2 weeks later, I typed in the word P because I didn't know what they put in, and it popped up, and then it gave my aunt's computer a virus. Boom. So I got a beating out of this world because people assumed I was watching it, but I just didn't know what they were doing. And so as I grew up, there was this like, oh my gosh, you can't talk about this. This is a bad thing. You typed in the word P, you got your butt whooped. You can't talk about it in church. You can't talk about it with your parents. Your parents are avoiding this. You get your period and they tell you completely different things about your period, but never tell you what that one thing that you can't do once you have it is. And I was just always curious about why sexuality was this like hush hush thing. And so when I started to learn more about just sex itself on the pleasure and intimacy side, I then had to kind of like rewire my brain. But before that started to happen, I wasn't a very intimate person. I was very like one person and one person only. I'm not having sex with anybody else, only the love of my life. We're going to get married. That's the end of it. But one of the things that never happened was that conversation with my partner
Mm.
about what they're doing. Who are they doing it with? Why are they doing it? I never had that conversation. So before being very informed about sexual health, being informed about STIs, I never asked a question. It was never a question. I just assumed you knew what you was doing. Like, you got to get tested. The school gives it for free. Like, you can't miss it. So there was that. I definitely never asked anyone questions, despite me being a very choosy and saying that I wouldn't be intimate with just anyone. Even then, I didn't ask the question.
Being an educator, was there ever a time after a session or after a moment of you educating or after you hearing a story that made you kind of change the trajectory of your sex life where it was kind of like, oh, wait, let me go back to the drawing board and add a couple of things because I thought I had like this super bulletproof plan, but after
Mm-hmm.
hearing and seeing this, I
Mm.
might need to go back and add a few things.
I think there's actually one that was completely mind blowing and changing is individuals who have low libido actually
Mm.
don't get to have that conversation about
Wow.
sexual health and wellness.
Okay, expand a little bit more.
So when you aren't active, and it's just because your humanly body doesn't care for sex, there are pieces of the conversation that don't they just don't happen.
Why I never would have thought about that. Okay, okay.
And so that completely changed my perspective on everything. Even when like the conversation comes up where someone's like, "Oh, this person only wants to have intimacy twice a month," and they because they don't want to have sex, all of the conversations are not happening.
Wow.
And so if you're a person who doesn't feel the desire to be intimate, you don't have the desire to talk about sex, period. It's uncomfortable. Like you don't want to open up a can of worms that you can't necessarily put back and, seal it to make sure that it was safe and secure. And that is when I had to have a conversation with everyone, whether you were hypersexual or hyposexual. I had to ask the question. There needed to be a conversation. This is in practice in general. If you don't have autonomy, or I don't even want to say it's autonomy, if you don't have the desire to talk about sexuality, how are you even going to have the conversation about what people are doing and are they getting tested? Like, that's just never a conversation for someone who's hypersexual, who just doesn't have the desire.
And you've just opened up my world to a completely different perspective because I can imagine there's a group out there who do subscribe to that, right?
Yeah.
And we as women might think, oh, you're not having these conversations because you're the typical man and that's just what happens.
Yeah.
But there's a group who subscribes to, no, I'm not having this conversation because I don't really care to have sex that much like that.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So even that goes even as far as like those who are experiencing dysfunction. So erectile dysfunctions, women who are experiencing pain, full intercourse, so when you have these different elements in place, that sexual health conversation does not happen at all because they're avoiding that specific conversation in general.
And I can imagine, because it's happening right now for me in real time, as an educator, that makes you go back to the drawing board and be like, oh, wait, because there is a community of people who subscribe to this, I have to kind of like shift my gears a little bit more.
Right. So
be more aware.
And even leaning in with like empathy. A lot of times when you're working with individuals who just don't prioritize sex, you have to be like, your empathy has to be on 10 times. Because you don't want them to feel like they're this weirdo because that's what's going through their brain. And you also don't want them to feel like they'll never find the love of their life.
Yeah.
And so when you're trying to bring up that conversation about sexual health education and you're like, well, do you get tested? It's like, no, because I don't want to have sex. So what's the point?
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that insight. I'm over here having, in real time, a brain shift. So,
yeah.
Okay. So, as we know, April is STI Awareness Month. And I've said that I want the tone of today's conversation, or what people can take away, is just ways to go back and have tips, tricks, tactics on how they can have transparent conversations surrounding testing, preventing of STIs, and more. So I want to play a little game with you.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a few scenarios or ways, I guess, that people can go and have transparent conversations, or just like little tidbits on things they can say to get the conversation flowing. You let me know if this is a good way to start, what you would add, or if you would leave it how it is. Okay? So, Susie says, I care about the safety of mine and my partner's sexual health. How do you feel if we get tested? Is her way of doing that.
I actually like that.
Okay.
It's very forward.
Okay.
It also gives the person the option to choose, right? So how do you feel, or how do we feel if we get tested? I feel like that's a really good way to bring up the conversation. It didn't feel uncomfortable for me once you read it out.
Right.
So I'm like, yeah, that's very forward.
And I love the open-ended question, like, how do you feel?
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm in your face, I'm
Right.
giving you an ultimatum. It's like, how do you feel?
Yeah, you're not telling the person we're going to do this. You're like, what are your thoughts on
Yeah.
tested? And that also opens up the conversation for why, when, what's the purpose? Yeah.
So Shayla, how her approach is, I think we should look at each other and go get tested before we have sex. I'm sorry, she said, I think we should look out for each other and go get tested before we have sex. What would you add? Do you think it's perfect?
I think we should look out for each other. I don't know. That feels, it feels uncomfortable. I think what I would add, I would ask the question. I feel like the question is always going to allow for the person to feel like they have a choice in the matter. That feels forced. Look out for each other. Like, what do you mean? What are we looking out for? I just feel like that would have so many questions, and it would give someone a little bit more pushback to actually do it. So I'd probably add in that open-ended question. I'd almost even I know a lot of people are comfortable with this. It's like when people want to say no, and they're like, I don't want to say no. I'm going to say everything else but no.
Yeah.
Right. I think just adding in, I want to make sure we're safe. Right. Not. I want us to look out for each other. What are you talking about?
Yeah. So Shayla, maybe if it was like, I think we should look out for each other. But I want to get tested to know our status before we have sex.
Yeah.
So how do you feel?
Yeah. Something along the lines of just making sure the person knows why.
Yeah. I love that. Mm-hmm. All right. So Kayla's approach is, what are your thoughts on being tested for STIs? And when was the last time you got one?
Got tested or?
Yeah.
That's a loaded conversation.
That is a loaded conversation, and it's super straightforward.
Yeah.
I feel like if you're that kind of person and where you're just like straightforward, then like go for it. It works for you.
Yeah.
But for the people who are not very straightforward, I think you need some kind of lubrication.
I would. You got to get it wet first. I would ask one, and then the other, versus both of them at the same time.
Yeah.
Again, the conversation is very uncomfortable. So there are some times where you just want to lean into it and move slowly. And if you're like, I don't care about moving slow, I'm trying to get this out of the way, then I guess, get out of the way. But you're going to get some
I asked.
You're going to get some pushback on that one.
Yeah. Very raw, very raw.
Mm-hmm.
All right, last one. Danielle's approach is, I attended an event and I learned how common STIs are. To cut our risks of getting one, I want to talk about us getting tested.
That's exactly what everybody needed to do.
That one was perfect. That one was perfect.
That's exactly everything. That answers the why, the when, the where. Like, that's exactly how you want to lean into the conversation. Just like, hey, I've been learning about this, or I know about this. Can we do this? How do you feel? Like, you're giving the person full control while also advocating for yourself.
And I think also maybe like throwing in some of those stats we read out earlier, letting them know like, hey, this is how many people yearly are contracting this thing. Why we can't go get tested,
Correct.
Correct. So yeah, all right, that was fun. Mm-hmm. Listen, this episode was so amazing. I felt like I brought the perfect person for STI Awareness Month that can help me and also help our viewers and listeners have some transparent conversations with family members, with partners, with friends. Like, these things are very much out here rampant and well and taking over.
Correct.
So why aren't we talking about them?
Yeah.
So I was excited to have you to help me execute that. But you're always doing so many amazing things. Tell us all about what you have coming up and also where our viewers and listeners can check you out at.
Your girl is on Boundaries season, and that Boundaries is with me. So I'm taking a break.
Love that for you.
So if you're looking out for me, you can find me on @ShirleyDoer_ on every single platform. More than likely, you'll catch me there maybe once this month, once the next month. It's fine, whichever. But yeah, your girl needs a break. It's time to rest. I'm taking a restful season to prioritize myself and come back restored. So I hope you join me on the journey of going back to restoration.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yes.